Pacific Fleet, 1944. While commanders struggled with rising mutinies threatening to cripple American naval operations, an unlikely solution emerged from the most unexpected place and the most unlikely person. What started as a dismissed silly idea would become one of the war's most effective morale operations, proving that sometimes survival depends not on firepower, but on understanding what keeps men human. This story connects us across oceans and decades. Before we discover what happened next, tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're in Tokyo, Sao Paulo, or small-town America, we love knowing where our community of history lovers gathers. Drop your location in the comments below. Now, let's meet the man who would change everything. James "Jimmy" Callahan, 26, stood in the USS Healy's galley with grease-stained hands and a problem that could get him court-martialed. The letter in his pocket, 3 weeks old, crumpled from constant reading, contained news that made every decision feel impossible. His younger brother Danny was missing in action over Germany. His mother's words begged him to come home, to request compassionate transfer. But Jimmy had seen something no one else seemed to notice. "Callahan, you listening?" Indy Chief Petty Officer Morrison's voice cut through his thoughts. "Yes, Chief. Then explain why you requisitioned 50 pounds of sugar when we're rationed to 20. Jimmy's throat tightened. The truth would sound insane. "The men need it, Chief." "Need it?" Morrison's face reddened. "We need ammunition. We need fuel. We don't need extra sugar for your fancy desserts, while morale's in the toilet and half the deck crew's ready to throw officers overboard." "That's exactly why." "Denied." Morrison slammed the requisition form down. "And if I catch you hoarding supplies again, you'll be scrubbing latrines until Tokyo Bay." Jimmy watched the chief leave, his jaw clenched. 3 attempted mutinies across the Pacific Fleet in 2 months, men cracking under pressure, heat, and the endless uncertainty of island-hopping campaigns. The official response? Harsher discipline, more punishment details. It was making everything worse. "You look like you want to punch something," said a voice behind him. Jimmy turned to find Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reeves, one of the Navy Nurse Corps officers, leaning against the doorframe with tired eyes that had seen too many broken men. She was the only officer who'd actually listened to him once. "I have an idea that could help," Jimmy said quietly, "but everyone thinks I'm crazy." "Nah, crazier than watching good sailors lose their minds because we treat them like machines." He pulled out a folded paper from his other pocket. Not his mother's letter, but something he'd been sketching for weeks. What if we could give them something to look forward to? Something that reminds them they're still human? Sarah studied his drawing. Her eyes widened slightly. "Ice cream?" she said. "You want to make ice cream on a warship in the South Pacific? Not just ice cream, a reason to keep going, 1 spoonful at a time." She looked at him like he'd proposed flying to the moon. "The commanders will never approve this." "Then we don't ask permission." The words hung between them, dangerous and electric. Sarah's expression shifted from surprise to something else, calculation. She glanced toward the corridor, then back at him. "If we're caught, you realize what happens?" "Same thing that happens if we do nothing and this ship tears itself apart from the inside," Jimmy said. "I've watched men lose hope, Lieutenant. I know what that looks like. My brother," his voice caught, "I couldn't help Danny, but maybe I can help them." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she folded his drawing and handed it back. "There's a supply run to Pearl Harbor next week," she said carefully. "Strange things get loaded onto ships during supply runs. Paperwork gets complicated." Jimmy's heart hammered. "You're saying—" "I'm saying nothing. But if someone had the right connections, the right moment, and was very, very careful." She met his eyes. "How serious are you about this?" Before he could answer, the ship's alarm shrieked. 3 short bursts, both of them froze. That wasn't a drill signal. That was the code for violence aboard, the exact thing they'd been discussing. Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom. All officers to the forward deck. We have a situation. Sarah ran toward the commotion. Jimmy followed, his stomach sinking as shouting echoed through the corridors. When they reached the deck, a crowd had formed a tight circle. In the center, two sailors had a junior officer pinned against the railing, his face bloodied. "I said we're not taking your orders anymore." One of the sailors screamed, his eyes wild with something beyond anger, pure desperation. Morrison and 3 other chiefs were trying to push through the crowd, but more men were joining the aggressors than helping. The entire deck was a powder keg, and someone had just lit the fuse. Jimmy saw Sarah's face go pale. This wasn't just a fight. This was the beginning of a mutiny, and they were all out of time. Morrison grabbed the first sailor, but the man swung wildly, catching the chief across the jaw. The crowd's energy shifted. Some men surged forward to help Morrison, others to attack. Within seconds, the organized discipline of a U.S. Navy vessel dissolved into chaos. "Stand down!" Commander Price's voice boomed across the deck, but it only made things worse. Officers meant authority. Authority meant the endless grind, the heat, the losses, the feeling of being trapped on a steel coffin in the middle of an ocean that wanted them dead. Someone threw a wrench. It clattered across the deck, barely missing Price's head. "Lock down this deck!" Price shouted into his radio. "I want Marines here now." Jimmy felt his chest constrict. He'd seen this pattern before, not on ships, but in the Chicago meatpacking plant where he'd worked before enlisting. Men pushed too hard, too long, with nothing to balance the pressure. When they finally broke, force only made the fractures deeper. Sarah grabbed his arm. "We need to get below." But Jimmy couldn't move. He watched the sailor adore. Eddie Kowalski, barely 19 from Brooklyn, sobbing as 2 Marines finally wrestled him to the ground. Eddie's hands were shaking. His eyes looked hollow, like something inside had simply given up. "He's not a bad kid," Jimmy whispered. "He just assaulted an officer," Sarah said. "He'll face court-martial, maybe worse." The Marines dragged Kowalski away. The crowd dispersed under Morrison's furious orders, but the tension remained thick as smoke. Jimmy saw it in every face, the same exhaustion, the same quiet desperation. Kowalski was just the first. There would be others. Price approached Morrison, his voice low but carrying. "That's the 4th incident this month. If this spreads, it will spread," Morrison interrupted. "Unless we do something different. More shore leave isn't possible. We're shipping out in 6 days." "Then what, Commander? More punishment?" "That's worked so well." Price's silence was answer enough. Jimmy felt the weight of his mother's letter in his pocket next to his sketches. Danny was missing, possibly dead. His mother needed him. He could request that transfer, leave this floating pressure cooker before it exploded, or he could stay and try something impossible. "Lieutenant Reeves," he said quietly, "that supply run to Pearl Harbor, when exactly does it leave?" She studied his face. 48 hours. "Why?" "Because we have 6 days before this ship becomes a war zone," Jimmy said. "And I need 3 of those days to build something." "Build what?" He looked at the spot where Kowalski had been dragged away, then at the dozens of hollow-eyed sailors returning to their stations. "Hope." Sarah shook her head slowly. "You really think ice cream can fix this?" "No," Jimmy admitted. "But I think remembering what we're fighting for might. These men, they're not machines. They're someone's brother, someone's son. They need to feel human again, even for 5 minutes, especially for 5 minutes. His voice grew firmer. "My brother Danny used to say that war doesn't just kill bodies. It kills the parts of us that make life worth living. If we can give that back, even in something as simple as a cold dessert on a hot deck." He met her eyes. "Maybe they'll remember why survival matters." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Finally she spoke. "My fiancé was at Guadalcanal. He survived the battle, came back, and 3 weeks later walked into the ocean. Just walked in, and didn't come back." Jimmy's breath caught. "They said it was an accident," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I read his letters. I knew." She looked at Jimmy with fierce intensity. If someone had given him a reason, any reason, to feel human again, maybe he'd still be here. So yes, Callahan, I'll help you build your impossible solution, because the alternative is watching more men lose themselves to this war, and I can't do that again. She straightened, her nurse's professionalism returning. But we do this smart. Morrison can't know. Price definitely can't know. If this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, she insisted, you take the fall. Not me, not anyone else. Understood? Jimmy nodded. Understood. Then meet me at the supply depot at 200 hours tomorrow. Bring your drawings and your math. And Callahan, she paused at the corridor entrance, pray that your ice cream is worth a court-martial. She disappeared into the ship's interior, leaving Jimmy alone with his racing thoughts. Around him, the USS Healy creaked and groaned, a massive steel beast carrying hundreds of men toward battles they might not survive. The air smelled of salt, fuel, and the acrid tang of fear. He pulled out his mother's letter one more time. Please come home, Jimmy. Danny's gone. I can't lose you, too. But if he left now, how many other mothers would lose their sons? How many brothers would walk into the ocean because no one gave them a reason to hold on? Jimmy carefully folded the letter and put it away. Then he pulled out his sketches, diagrams of a modified refrigeration unit, calculations for cream ratios, notes on flavor combinations that might remind men of home. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was exactly what they needed. He had 48 hours to make it real. No. At 0200 hours, Jimmy stood in the shadows near the supply depot, his heart hammering against his ribs. The USS Healy's night watch moved in predictable patterns. He'd been observing for weeks, though he'd never imagined using that knowledge for something like this. Sarah appeared like a ghost, her nurse's whites replaced with dark work clothes. She carried a clipboard that Jimmy realized probably contained very official-looking falsified paperwork. "You're sure about this?" she whispered. Before he could answer, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Both of them pressed against the bulkhead, barely breathing. Morrison passed within 3 feet of them, his face haggard even in the dim emergency lighting. He looked like a man watching his ship disintegrate and having no tools to stop it. When the footsteps faded, Sarah unlocked the depot door. 5 minutes. That's all we have before the next patrol. Inside, Jimmy's eyes adjusted to the darkness broken only by Sarah's small flashlight. Crates of supplies stretched in organized rows. Ammunition, medical supplies, food rations, mechanical parts. Everything needed to keep a warship functioning. Everything except what made the men want to keep functioning. There, Sarah pointed to a section marked for Pearl Harbor redistribution. These supplies are already logged as shipped out. If something's added to this manifest, it'll disappear into the chaos, Jimmy finished. He'd worked logistics before the Navy. He understood how paperwork could make things invisible. They worked quickly. Jimmy had made a list: industrial-grade ice cream ingredients, a small compressor that could be modified, copper tubing, insulation materials, items that individually looked innocent, but together represented his impossible gamble. Callahan! Sarah's voice was tight. Look at this! She held up a requisition form. In Morrison's handwriting, request denied, morale supplies non-essential, disciplinary measures remain primary protocol. He's not wrong by the book, Sarah said, but the book wasn't written for what's happening out here. Jimmy thought of Kowalski's hollow eyes, of his brother Danny's last letter talking about the cold numbness that came before men stopped caring whether they lived or died. The regulations were designed to maintain order, but they weren't designed for this, for the slow, psychological disintegration of men pushed beyond their limits. Then we write a new page, Jimmy said. They finished loading. Sarah altered the manifest with practiced precision. Jimmy suspected this wasn't her first time bending Navy regulations. As they prepared to leave, she grabbed his arm. The supply ship leaves at 600. I've arranged for you to be on the loading crew. You'll have 3 hours at Pearl to acquire what we can't source here. There's a civilian contractor, his name is Chen, who owes me a favor. Tell him Nightingale sent you. Nightingale. A sad smile crossed her face. What the men call me when they think I can't hear, because I sit with them at night when the memories get bad. Her expression hardened. Get what you need, Callahan. We have 5 days until this ship deploys to the Marianas. If you're going to save lives with desert, you better make it count. And the next 72 hours blurred together. Pearl Harbor was chaos. Jimmy had forgotten what solid ground felt like. Chen turned out to be a Chinese-American supply specialist with connections that defied explanation. When Jimmy mentioned Nightingale, the man's entire demeanor changed. She saved my nephew's life, Chen said simply. Sat with him for 3 days during fever. What do you need? Jimmy showed him the list. Chen's eyebrows rose. Ice cream? In the South Pacific? Not just ice cream. A reason for men to make it through another day. Chen studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. My father owned a dessert shop in San Francisco before they took us, before I had to prove my loyalty by serving in any way they'd let me. His voice carried old pain. I remember what it meant. That moment of sweetness, when everything else was bitter. Come with me. What Chen provided went beyond Jimmy's list. Industrial compressors rated for shipboard use, cream powder that wouldn't spoil in heat, flavor extracts concentrated enough that a single bottle could make hundreds of servings. And most importantly, technical specifications for retrofitting a refrigeration unit to produce frozen desserts on a vessel never designed for such things. This is too much, Jimmy said. I can't. You're not paying, Chen interrupted. You're doing something the brass won't, treating men like humans. That's payment enough. He paused. But Callahan, if this works, you remember something. We're all fighting the same war, even those of us they don't quite trust. The men you're helping, help them remember that too. Jimmy returned to the USS Healy with enough supplies to either save the ship's morale or earn himself a court-martial, possibly both. The next challenge was installation. Jimmy recruited Tommy Breslin, an engineer's mate from Philadelphia who'd been reprimanded twice for unauthorized equipment modifications. Tommy took one look at Jimmy's plans and grinned. You're either brilliant or insane, Tommy said. Maybe both. When do we start? Tonight. And Tommy, this stays between us. Who else knows? Lieutenant Reeves, and now you. That's it. Tommy's grin faded. If Morrison catches us, he won't. We'll work during night watch, in the auxiliary mechanical room. No one goes there except during maintenance. They started that night. The auxiliary room was hot, cramped, and filled with pipes that seemed designed to prevent any useful work. But it was also isolated, its noise masked by the engine room next door. Hour after hour, Jimmy and Tommy worked, retrofitting the compressor, installing copper cooling lines, building an insulated chamber from salvaged materials, testing pressure valves and refrigerant flow. It was delicate, demanding work. One mistake could cause an explosion or poison the air system. Tell me again why we're risking our necks for frozen milk. No, Tommy asked on the third night, his hands bleeding from sharp metal edges. Jimmy thought about Kowalski being dragged away, about his brother's letters describing the numbness, about Sarah's fiancé walking into the ocean. Because sometimes the smallest things are what keep us tethered, he said. My dad died when I was 12, worked himself to death in the factories. But every Sunday, no matter how broke we were, my mom would make us ice cream. Just sugar, milk, and whatever flavor she could afford. And for those 20 minutes, we weren't poor. We weren't grieving. We were just a family. He tightened a valve. These men, they're fighting thousands of miles from home, watching friends die, living in constant fear. They need something, anything, that reminds them why life matters. That's not silly or trivial. That's survival. Tommy was quiet for a moment. My girl back home works at an ice cream shop. I haven't told anyone because it seems stupid compared to the war. But I dream about it sometimes. The smell of vanilla, the sound of her laugh when I'd come by after work." He looked at Jimmy. "You think this'll really help?" "I think if we don't try, we'll never know, and men will keep breaking." On the 5th night, just hours before the USS Healy was scheduled to deploy, they finished. The machine hummed to life, its compressor vibrating with mechanical certainty. Jimmy held his breath as he added the first mixture: cream powder, sugar, vanilla extract, water mixed to precise ratios. 20 minutes later, he extracted a small cup of soft-serve ice cream. It looked perfect. He tasted it. For 5 seconds, Jimmy was back in his mother's kitchen, 7 years old, without a war or an ocean separating him from everything he loved. The sweetness wasn't just flavor, it was memory, hope, and humanity compressed into a single spoonful. "Tommy," he whispered, "it works." Tommy tried it and his eyes went distant. "Holy hell, it actually works." They stood in that cramped, hot mechanical room, eating ice cream at 300 hours while the USS Healy prepared for deployment into combat zones. It should have felt absurd. Instead, it felt like the most important thing either of them had ever done. "So what now?" Tommy asked. "We just start serving ice cream and hope no one asks questions?" Jimmy shook his head. "No, now we tell the one person who can make this official." "Morrison?" Tommy looked horrified. "He'll shut us down instantly." "Maybe. Or maybe he's desperate enough to try anything." Jimmy cleaned the equipment carefully. "Either way, we can't hide this. If it's going to work, it needs to be real. Official. Something the men can count on. And if Morrison says no?" Jimmy thought about his mother's letter still in his pocket, about the transfer he could request, about the easy way out. "Then we do it anyway," he said, "and deal with the consequences." The next morning, Jimmy requested a meeting with Chief Morrison. The chief's face when Jimmy walked into his office suggested he expected another problem. "Callahan, make it quick. We deploy in 4 hours." "Chief, I need to show you something." Morrison's expression darkened. "If this is about that sugar requisition again, it's about keeping this ship from tearing itself apart." That got Morrison's attention. "Talk." Jimmy took a breath. "For the past 5 nights, I've been building something in the auxiliary mechanical room, something that might address the morale crisis. I need you to come see it before you decide whether to court-martial me." Morrison stood slowly. "You've been conducting unauthorized construction? On my ship?" "Yes, Chief." "Using supplies you somehow acquired despite my denial?" "Yes, Chief." Morrison's jaw clenched. "You realize I could have you in the brig right now." "Yes, Chief, but I'm asking you to look first. 5 minutes, then decide." The walk to the auxiliary room felt like a funeral march. Morrison's silence was worse than shouting. When they entered the cramped space, Tommy snapped to attention, looking like he wanted to disappear through the bulkhead. Morrison stared at the modified equipment. "What am I looking at, Callahan?" "A solution, Chief." Jimmy activated the machine. "Kowalski wasn't a bad sailor. None of them are. They're just men who've been pushed too far with nothing to balance it. This," he gestured to the humming compressor, "this gives them something." "Something," Morrison repeated flatly. 20 minutes later, Jimmy handed the chief a cup of vanilla ice cream. Morrison looked at it like it might explode. "You modified ship equipment to make dessert." "I modified ship equipment to give men a reason to keep going," Jimmy corrected. 5 minutes of normalcy, a reminder of home, something to look forward to between battles. "Chief, the official response to the morale crisis isn't working. Harsher discipline just makes men more desperate. But this," he met Morrison's eyes, "this might actually help." Morrison stared at the cup for a long moment. Then, slowly, he tasted it. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Surprise, memory, something almost painful. He took another spoonful. Then another. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "My daughter's 6th birthday was the day I shipped out. We had strawberry ice cream. She got it all over her face." He looked at Jimmy. I haven't thought about that in months. Been too busy managing disciplinary problems. He set the cup down carefully. This is highly irregular. You violated multiple protocols. Used unauthorized supplies. Constructed unapproved equipment. Yes, Chief. And you involved Lieutenant Reeves and engineers Mate Breslin in this scheme. Jimmy straightened. They were following my orders, Chief. Any consequences should be mine alone. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he almost smiled. At ease, Callahan. I'm not court-martialing anyone. He gestured to the machine. Can this produce enough for the entire crew? Not all at once, but we could do rotations. Maybe 50 servings per day to start. As men finish dangerous duties or reach milestones, something earned, not just given. Morrison nodded slowly. Earned. That's important. They need to feel like they're achieving something, not just being placated. He studied the setup with new eyes. This could actually work, but we need approval from Commander Price. Jimmy's stomach dropped. Price will never agree. Price, Morrison said carefully, is under pressure from Fleet Command about mutiny rates. If I present this as a disciplinary tool, a reward system for exemplary behavior, he might listen. He looked at Jimmy. But if this backfires, if morale gets worse or men start fighting over access, it's not just you who faces consequences, it's all of us. Can you handle that responsibility? Jimmy thought about all the men depending on something, anything, to keep them human through the hell they were sailing toward. Yes, Chief, I can. Then clean this place up. Make it regulation. I'll talk to Price in 1 hour. Morrison paused at the door. And Callahan, this better work, because if it doesn't, we're all... The ship's alarm cut him off. Not the 3-burst violence code this time, but a longer, more ominous sound. The General Quarters alert, combat stations, immediate deployment. The USS Healy was going to war, ready or not. And Jimmy's impossible solution was about to face its first real test, whether it could keep men sane through actual battle, or whether frozen desert would prove meaningless against the realities of naval combat in the Pacific theater. Morrison met Jimmy's eyes one last time. Guess we're about to find out if hope tastes better than fear, sailor. Get to your station. Then he was gone, leaving Jimmy in the auxiliary room with a humming ice cream machine and the crushing weight of every life that might depend on his silly idea working. Outside, the USS Healy's engines roared to life. They were heading toward the Marianas, toward the Japanese fleet, toward battles that would test every man aboard beyond anything they'd experienced. And Jimmy had just bet everything that a spoonful of ice cream might make the difference between survival and collapse. Marcus stood in Captain Morrison's office, his hands trembling behind his back. Lieutenant, crew morale has improved 30% since the ice cream implementation, Morrison said, reviewing reports. However, I'm hearing concerns about your personal involvement with production schedules. Sir, I'm simply ensuring quality control. You're spending 4 hours daily in the galley. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Some officers question whether you're avoiding bridge duties. Marcus felt his chest tighten. That's not true, sir. Then explain why you requested transfer from combat operations to logistics. Morrison leaned forward. You were one of our finest tactical officers. The room felt smaller. Marcus thought of David's last letter, tucked in his pocket. Keep pushing forward, brother. Make every decision count. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. My brother died because I made a tactical error at Midway, Marcus said quietly. I recommended a formation that left his destroyer exposed. After that, I couldn't make those decisions anymore. Every order felt like sentencing men to death. Morrison's expression softened slightly. So you found something simpler. Ice cream. It's not simple, sir, it's certain. Men smile, morale rises, fights decrease. No one dies from my choices. Lieutenant, you can't hide in a galley forever. A knock interrupted them. Ensign Parker burst in, breathless. Sir, fight on the main deck. 20 men involved. Commander Hayes is injured. Morrison stood. Marcus, you're with me. Now. The deck was chaos. Sailors from two different divisions formed hostile circles, shouting accusations, while medical personnel attended to Commander Hayes, blood streaming from his temple. "Stand down!" Morrison's voice cut through the noise. The crowd barely responded. Marcus saw Chief Kowalski at the center, his face twisted with rage as he pointed at Petty Officer Chen. "He sabotaged our ice cream rations. Third time this month my division got half portions while his got double." Chen stepped forward. "That's a lie. Your men waste everything." "Enough!" Marcus pushed through the crowd. His heart hammered, but something shifted inside him. This wasn't tactical warfare. This was fixable. "Chief, when did you notice the shortage?" "Every Tuesday for 3 weeks, Kowalski spat. Marcus turned to Chen. "Your division receives supplies when?" "Monday evening, sir." Marcus suddenly understood. "Captain, permission to investigate the supply chain?" Morrison nodded grimly. 30 minutes later, Marcus stood in the cold storage unit, reviewing inventory logs with Parker. The pattern was clear. Someone with access codes was redistributing ice cream quotas, creating artificial scarcity. "Sir, look at this." Parker pointed to a signature. "Supply Officer Henderson authorized all the transfers." Marcus's blood ran cold. Lieutenant Henderson was his roommate, his friend since training. "Where is Henderson now?" "In his quarters, sir." Marcus found Henderson burning papers in a metal trash can, his hands shaking. "Tom, what have you done?" Henderson looked up, tears in his eyes. "They were going to discover everything, Marcus. The gambling debts, the black market trades. You created division conflicts to cover theft. I needed chaos, distraction." Henderson's voice broke. "I'm sorry." Marcus faced an impossible choice: protect his friend or protect the crew. Marcus sat across from Henderson in the locked office, the burned papers still smoking. "How much did you steal?" Marcus asked quietly. $12,000 worth of supplies over 6 months. Henderson couldn't meet his eyes. "Sugar, chocolate, coffee, things that sell well on black market channels. I thought I could repay the debts before anyone noticed. Men almost killed each other today because of your scheme." "I know." Henderson's voice cracked. "I never meant for Hayes to get hurt. I just needed more time." "Time!" Marcus stood abruptly. "David didn't get more time, Tom. He got orders I gave him, and he followed them into death. You know what that taught me. That our choices have consequences we can't control." Henderson looked up. "So you're turning me in." Marcus paced the small room, every instinct warring inside him. Tom had covered for him during his darkest depression after Midway, had sat with him through nightmares, never judging. "If I don't report this, the division conflicts continue," Marcus said. "If I do, you face court-martial, possibly prison. I deserve it. Maybe. But does your family, your sister just had a baby. You told me you're sending money home." Henderson nodded miserably. Marcus made his decision. "Here's what happens. You confess everything to Captain Morrison. Request immediate transfer and psychiatric evaluation. Admit the gambling problem. Accept treatment. Marcus, I'll testify on your behalf. The PTSD, the pressure. Maybe they'll show leniency, but you tell the truth, all of it tonight." Henderson's hands shook. "Why would you help me after what I did?" "Because someone once told me that making good decisions means accepting the consequences, even when it costs you everything." 2 hours later, Marcus stood outside Morrison's office as MPs escorted Henderson away. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the newly expanded ice cream facility, watching crews from 8 divisions work together seamlessly. The tension that had plagued the ship had transformed into something unexpected: cooperation. "You really think ice cream solved everything?" Chief Kowalski asked, now running quality control. "No," Marcus said. "Honesty did. Accountability. The ice cream just gave us something to build trust around." Petty Officer Chen approached with production reports. "Sir, we're at 93% satisfaction across all divisions. Fight incidents down 85% fleet-wide since implementation." Morrison arrived for the weekly inspection, his expression unreadable. Lieutenant, I received word about Henderson's court-martial. They sentenced him to dishonorable discharge, but suspended prison time due to psychological factors. He paused. Your testimony was decisive. Marcus nodded slowly. He made terrible choices, sir, but he was also sick. I couldn't let him be destroyed without trying to help. That decision cost you, though. Some officers question your judgment now. I know, sir. Morrison handed him an envelope. Then you should read this. Marcus opened it, a commendation letter signed by Fleet Admiral Nimitz himself, praising the Ice Cream Initiative's impact on Pacific Fleet morale. At the bottom, a handwritten note. Lieutenant Reeves, your innovation saved lives by preventing conflict. This is the kind of strategic thinking we need. Recommend promotion to Lieutenant Commander and reassignment to Fleet Morale Operations. Marcus stared at the words, barely breathing. You found a different way to serve, Morrison said quietly. One that honors your brother's memory without repeating your past mistakes. That takes more courage than any tactical maneuver. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the deck of the USS Missouri as the Japanese delegation signed surrender documents, ending the war. Ice cream machines now operated on 43 ships across the Pacific Fleet. He held 2 letters, one from Henderson, now working at a veteran rehabilitation center, helping other sailors struggling with PTSD. Another from his mother, finally able to speak David's name without breaking down. Your brother would be proud, she wrote. You found a way to bring people together instead of tearing them apart. That's the real victory. Ensign Parker approached, now promoted to his assistant. Sir, the new recruits are asking about the ice cream program's origin story. Should I tell them? Marcus smiled. Tell them it started with a simple idea, that sometimes the smallest comforts create the biggest changes, that caring for each other's humanity matters as much as any battle strategy. And Henderson, sir, do I mention? Tell them that good people sometimes make terrible mistakes, but redemption is always possible when we face the truth. D. As the celebration continued around him, Marcus realized something profound. He'd spent years believing his tactical failure at Midway defined him, but his real contribution hadn't been avoiding decisions. It had been making the one decision that mattered most, choosing to care. The Ice Cream Initiative expanded throughout the Navy, eventually becoming standard on all vessels. The program reduced shipboard conflicts by 85% and became a cornerstone of military morale operations. Marcus Reeves never returned to combat tactical operations. Instead, he built a career ensuring that sailors far from home had small moments of joy, proof that even in humanity's darkest hours, sweetness could still triumph. Stories have an incredible power. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that small acts of kindness can change everything. Until next time, remember, history's greatest victories aren't always won on the battlefield.